Hey guys, okay, so we've had a few people mention that there is a far easier and faster way to add one-click seam allowances or seam allowances to your digital sewing patterns. So as you can see here in front of us, we've just got a basic bodice block with no necessary alterations. So before we used to use the brushes tool, and we're still going to keep that live on this video post, or on the blog page, sorry, on the courses page for adding one-click seam allowance, but we're going to add this as well, just so you've got two different options. So we're no longer going to be using the brushes. We're now going to be using, object, and then path, and then offset path. So what we do is simply get your small selection tool, because we're just selecting the outline of our block here, and then going to go to object, and then path, and then offset path. And here, obviously, just to make sure that if your document's in millimeters or inches, obviously it'll appear here. So instead, what I'm going to do is, you can see it's already previewed it. So this is 0.3 centimeters. If I want to use 1 cm, it'll then give us 1 cm. If I want to use 2 cm, so it's just starting to preview it, and you can have a look. And there's a few little issues, but we can correct those as we've done in the past with the brushes version of adding seam allowance. So I'm just going to add 1 centimeter to this. And the mitre doesn't actually matter, just leave it at 5, it's not a big problem. And then all you do is simply click OK. And as you can see, you've now added seam allowance to your block. And you can always then just, let's say, select that outer line, and we can then make that 2 points just to make it obvious that that is a cut line. And obviously now my blocks are overlapping, so I'm going to get my big selection tool. I'm just going to click over this entire object and just drag it off to the right hand side so they're not overlapping anymore. And as you can see here, we've got a few slight little issue here, so I'm just going to extend out from that dart, get the plus, so add anchor point tool, and then just extend out until it hits that seam allowance, add a point, and I'm just going to minus that point. Okay, so it's nice and clean. So that's how we add one-click, or how we add seam allowance using the the object, and then path, and then offset path. Now, when you do this, you might find, for some reason, that you get something slightly different. So obviously, this has been applied to the outside. So let's take this for example. As you can see, this is a shape here. It's not connected at these 2 points. We have this center fold line instead. So if we apply this path to these, let's say, 2 panels here, and essentially they're just lines. It's not a panel, it is just one continuous line because it's not been joined. We go object, and then path, and then offset path. As you can see, it's applying it to the inside as well. And the reason why is because it's simply jumping to the opposite side. It's assuming that this is the object, not the entire outline. Okay, so if I were to then, let's go to our Pathfinder and just unite this. So now you can see it's one big item, and I go object, path, offset path, you'll see that it applies it to that object, to the outline of that object. So I hope that makes sense. So for example, if you do find that you're getting an inside line, it's very simple, just click OK. What you can do is just simply with your small selection tool, select on the outer line here, go to your cut tool, which is just here, and then just simply snip on the top, snip on the bottom, go back to your small selection tool, and then we're going to click on the inside line, and we can just hit backspace a few times to remove it. Okay, so it's perfectly viable. You can use this, not a problem at all. It's just a slightly longer process. And we can simply cut here, small selection tool, select just the inside line, hit backspace a few times, and you've essentially got the same thing, but obviously this is an open-ended shape. And what we can do is we can simply just drag with the small selection tool, click on that line, find the point, click up and drag, and you can just extend those lines out. Okay, so really helpful. This is especially helpful if you don't want any seam allowance on the center front of your block because you want it to be on the fold, for example. You know, we don't want seam allowance here because obviously we'll have a seam. Same on the back as well. You know, quite possibly it's the case where you want, let's just remove the outline there, let's remove that. Let's just select this and join them with the Pathfinder Unite. We have other tutorials that show you how to do this. I'm not going to explain that just yet. What we can do is we have this line on the center front, but this one we actually want to go path, offset path around the whole item because we want a seam in the center back here. And then once again, let's just select our outside lines and make that 2. And there you have a pretty decent block. Once again, let's get our plus anchor point tool here. Let's click. Let's go to the minus anchor point tool and just remove that other point. Okay, perfect. So let's just have a quick look also at looking because maybe possibly you don't want a seam allowance with inside your dart, and that's absolutely fine. We can actually prevent that from happening by doing a slight little adjustment here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Object. I'm going to go to Select All, So select everything. I'm going to Object and then Lock Selection. So we can't edit it or play with it. Next, I'm going to go to my pen tool. I'm just going to simply draw a point from here to here. So a line. I'm drawing a line from here to here using the point tool. Okay, then let's click off. And let's just get the line tool. Where is that? There we go. Let's get the line tool. And you see we're going to go from the center here. You can see how it's saying intersect. I'm going to click and drag from that line up to this center point here, which is just under the bust, or just to the bust point. So from the center of this line to the bust point. I'm then going to just simply use the eyedropper tool over here and just, while it's selected, click on that line to make sure it is a guideline. Same with this one. Eyedropper tool, just to give us a bit of a guide here. Okay, so next what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock that again, so select all, object, and then lock selection, so we can't edit those either. I'm then going to get my pen tool, so this one here. Let's give it a slightly thicker line width so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to click here, 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 and here. Okay, and next let's go to our large selection tool. And what we're going to do is I'm simply going to get my rotation tool, going to click it at this point here, and then going to translate this all the way across to the opposite side. It's like me closing that dart. And next, I'm going to get my small selection tool. I'm going to click and drag that down until it hits the seam. And let's just zoom in. I can get my convert anchor point tool and literally just trace that line there. Let's move that in. Let's zoom out. And then when I click on this again, so let's get the big selection tool, the black one. Let's click on this item here. Let's then go rotate. Click that point to rotate, and we're going to rotate it back to where it was. And so we're creating, I think they call it a witch's hat, which basically, well, I'll explain in a minute. So I'm just going to select this item. I'm going to right click and go transform, reflect, and then make sure it's vertical. So we're reflecting on the vertical axis and hit copy. And let's just drag it away. Let's take that point there. Let's move it to this point. Let's go to the rotation tool. Let's then rotate that back. So you see how we're sort of like building this witch's hat. And then what we're going to do is let's just take these two items here. Let's go to our Pathfinder and then just unite those two objects. So it's one, as you can see, it's one highlighted object. Let's just make that a different color so you can see it. There we go. Let's take the dash off it so you can also see it a bit clearer. So this is now our object, and essentially you want to continue that seam allowance using that object. And to do that, it's really simple. I'm just going to get my small selection tool, going to click on this outline again. I'm then going to go to the scissor tool, snip, snip. I can then get rid of these lines here. So I'm just getting my small selection tool, click on these lines because we've snipped it away from this little peak, and hit backspace a few times. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this item here, this witch's hat. I'm going to go to Object, then Path, then Offset Path, and once again it's 1 centimeter. Click OK. I'm going to get my scissor tool, and I'm just going to snip and snip, and then let's just get rid of the inside one because we don't need it. And as you can see here, we've already started to create that little fold in. So next what we want to do is basically join this to the block. So I'm going to go to Object, Unlock All. Unlocks everything. And now what I'm going to do is I'm simply just going to get my seam allowance here. So I'm going to select my small selection tool. I'm going to go to the cut tool. I'm just going to snip here and snip here. Let's go back, small selection tool, click on this item, hit backspace, and now that's disappeared. We can get our small selection tool, click and drag over this area, right click, join, and then we go again, click and drag over these 2 points here, right click and join. And as you can see, we've now got the seam allowance that is outside of that dart, which is looking fabulous. Next, I'm going to just change the line color here. So small selection tool, click on this one, get my eyedropper tool to select the same attributes as this line. So it'll be 2 points and black. Is inside line? Well, we're going to make that the same as our pattern line. There we go. And if you want to, you can always make these dashed lines. So let's just get our small selection tool. I'm going to click on this element here. I'm going to go to the scissor tool and just snip. Select this one again, scissor tool, snip, and then with these selected, I can then go to my eyedropper tool and select the dash line. And we can remove these if we necessarily don't want that line. We can also drag this out, and this is looking much cleaner. And we can do the same to this one as well. Okay, so that's just a little bit of an overview of seam allowance, how to add seam allowance in a different way. a much quicker way, and also how to create a little witch's hat to extend this out. So obviously when we then close this, when it comes to sewing, this dart will actually go to this side because it's matched to this bottom line, not this bottom line. Essentially, if you wanted to match it to this bottom line, you'd draw the shape here, and then you'd rotate it to this point, redraw that seam out, mark that bottom line, and then you would rotate it back, and then obviously transform it, as we've done before. Anyway, yeah, let me know how you get along with that, and if you've got any other suggestions, that's really great. We're going to certainly add some more tutorials to answer some of your questions. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you soon.